What's up, everyone? I am the Closet Catholic, and today I wanted to take some time to talk about something that I've been meaning to discuss for a while now, and that is what's happened with my ordination, given that I was ordained in the Church of the Nazarene. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today and just share some things with you. So I have here a copy, actually, of my ordination certificate. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So I was ordained in 2021. So about 2 years ago, I was ordained. And well, here, let me actually show you. So this is actually a picture of me being ordained. That's my wife next to me. I also have a picture here. Let me find it. There it is, of me actually receiving my ordination certificate. I know the picture is really dark, so the lighting in that place is awful. So in the Church of the Nazarene, the process of being ordained, it's not like you can just, go to your local church and say, hey, I feel like God's calling me to ministry, and they just ordain you. It's a very long process. For me, it started in 2009. So it was a process of 14 years for me. Well, not 14, 12 years for me. And a part of the process is, all right, first you go to your local church, like you go to your pastor and you say, hey, I think God's calling me to ministry. They have a meeting with the church board. They vote on whether or not to give you a minister's license, which is called a local minister's license, which allows you to function as a minister just within that local church. Other churches won't recognize it. And then once you've had that for a year, then you're recommended to the district level. Then you go through interviews there. They give you a district license. And from that point, you have 10 years to meet your educational requirements, which for me, I met my educational requirements by going to college, doing my bachelor's and then my master's. And there's a lot of education you have to do to be a minister. In fact, for most people, I think that part of the process takes anywhere from 6 to 10 years. Or at least the ordination process as a whole takes anywhere from 6 to 10 years. So it's a long process. You do a lot of interviews. You're evaluated pretty frequently, at least on an annual basis. And then you have what's called an ordination interview, where you sit before a board of what's called the Ministerial Credentials Committee, and they can ask you anything. The interview is usually about an hour long. I mean, they can ask you anything ranging from theology to church history to things in your personal life. Like, the door is open for anything. And then if they approve you for ordination, then you go to the final stage, which is kind of ambiguous. Sometimes it involves kind of a second interview. Sometimes it's just showing up to the ordination service and then they lay hands on you and ordain you. But anyways, so all that to say, it was a big buildup for me to be ordained, and I ran into a lot of hurdles along the way. Not really on my part, just church politics and bureaucratic nonsense that delayed it. Because really, I should have been ordained originally in 2016, I believe. I should have been, but there was a mess up in the process and whatever. Anyways, so a couple months ago, I sent an email to my district superintendent, which is what I'm supposed to do in this case. And I really agonized over sending this email, as you'll be able to tell. So this is the email I sent. I said, to whom it may concern, per the manual, which is like the official document for the Church of the Nazarene, per the manual, paragraphs 5 through 8 and 5 through 9.2, I hereby resign my credentials. A signed printed copy of this will be mailed to the district office. Cordially. So I resigned my credentials, which means, here, I'll actually pull up the definition for anyone curious. So I resigned my credentials, which according to the manual, and I'm using the 2013 version because the 2017 version, which is normally available online, is down right now. I can't access it. Anyways, it says the status of the credential of a member of the clergy in good standing, because I was in good standing, who for personal reasons has decided that he or she no longer wishes to be considered as a I should be a minister, and gives up the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of being a member of the clergy to become a layperson on a permanent basis. So that's what I did. I resigned my credential, which means I'm no longer considered an ordained clergyman for the Church of the Nazarene. And I really wanted to make this video like right after I did that. But I waited on sharing it because I wanted to see, I wanted to give my honest thoughts on like, how am I experiencing that, right? I mean, like I did a lot of work to be ordained, but now I'm resigning my credentials. I'm basically turning it in, and like, surely I'm going to have some sort of experience with that, like an emotional experience or something. But what I found interesting is after I sent that email, and even while I was, typing that email, like I expected it to be sort of an agonizing experience, right? But I honestly just didn't feel anything. It was kind of bizarre. I sent the email and it was just like sending any other email. I look at my ordination certificate now, and I know I just have a copy of it here, the original somewhere, but I look at the copy of it, and to me it's just another piece of paper. I really didn't feel anything when I resigned my credentials, which should be again, I was expecting it to be a big deal, but it wasn't. Which is interesting because when I was ordained, so I'll pull up that picture again. So when I was ordained, I expected that to be a pretty emotional time for me. But one thing you won't know from this picture is 2 weeks before this picture, I guess over here, 2 weeks before this picture happened is when I opened up to my wife about the fact that I feel like God's calling me to the Catholic Church. Now, I didn't know when that was going to happen, and she rightfully pointed out, now wait, Ben, you're going to be ordained here in 2 weeks, and now you're telling me you think you're going to become Catholic? Like, why are you being ordained? And I told her, I said, well, I don't know when God's going to lead me to the Catholic Church. I just feel like it's going to happen at some point, but I think it would be unwise and imprudent of me to make a drastic decision now and say, no, I'm not going to be ordained because of a possibility in the future that I would become Catholic. So I went ahead, I went through with ordination, and I felt peace about that. I said, you know what, this is where I am right now. I feel at peace about that. I think God still wants me to be here for now, so I'm going to go through with the ordination. So I did. But it was interesting because during the ordination service, it was like the same thing as it is now. I had like no emotion throughout the entire thing. It was pretty underwhelming. And I thought, like, in this moment, right, like when they're laying hands on me and they're ordaining me, and there I am with my wife who is pregnant with our daughter, like our firstborn, I thought, maybe I'll tear up a little bit. Maybe I'll feel giddy or excited or something. But it was nothing. It was really nothing. It was so bizarre to me. And a part of the reason is because in the back of my mind, I knew I was being drawn to the Catholic Church. But there was another reason, too, why that moment kind of didn't have an emotional impact on me. And I want to give a little bit of background to this. So, as I mentioned before, in the Church of the Nazarene, when you're ordained, you have to go through what's called an ordination interview. And depending on how that interview goes, you will either be recommended for ordination or you will not be recommended for ordination. Well, prior to that interview, they have, at least on my district, they have kind of like a pre-interview thing, almost like an interview orientation. So they walk you through how the rest of the process is going to go. They walk you through what to expect in the interview. They walk you through even like some specific questions to be prepared for. And one of the things they said, I'll never forget this because this just killed me. One of the things they said was, expect to be asked the question, what are you going to do if we decide not to ordain you? They said, expect that question. But then they followed that up. And this was my district superintendent telling me this, who was my church leader, my church superior. And he said, if you get asked that question, this is how you should answer it. You should answer it by saying, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because it's God who ordains me and not you. And coming into the Catholic Church is such a ridiculous thing to say. But at the time, like, that really gutted me when I heard my district superintendent say that. And then what I did is I went to the manual to look up, again, the theology of ordination and what the Church of the Nazarene actually believes about it. But the reason that killed me is because leading up to my ordination, a part of it was how significant ordination is in the Church of the Nazarene. Like, it's like you go from being a minister, which as a licensed minister, I could be the senior pastor of a church. I could essentially do anything. The only thing I couldn't do was be a district superintendent. I couldn't serve on district level committees as a clergyman. And there's a technicality where I could officiate the sacraments as just a licensed minister and not an ordained minister. And I could do weddings, I could do funerals. But technically the only way I could do that is because the district superintendent was allowing me to do that under the authority of his ordination. So it's kind of a technicality there. But anyway, so leading up to my ordination, I always had this sense that, you know, when you're ordained, something happens, right? Like, that is a unique thing that the church has the authority to do, and it's not just a formality. It's God working in a unique way. Like, there is a grace at work. It's like one step below a sacrament in the Church of the Nazarene, is how I understood it. And growing up in the Church of the Nazarene, ordained ministers they're definitely viewed differently, even though in the Church of the Nazarene, a lot of people talk about, the universal priesthood of all believers, so ministers are really no different than lay people. And I heard people talk about that, and that's what I was taught myself, actually. But in practice, ordained ministers are at a different level, which communicates the idea that there's something unique about being ordained by the church. However, during that meeting where my district superintendent said that's how you should answer that question, I realized that in the Church of the Nazarene, ordination is really just a formality. That they even recognize the church really doesn't do anything in ordination. So here's actually the wording from the manual of the Church of the Nazarene under the Theology of Ordination, paragraph 502 in the 2003 version of the manual. It says this. It says, ordination reflects the biblical belief that God calls and gifts certain men and women for ministerial leadership. Ordination is the act of the church. As a side note, I find it interesting that they capitalize the word church here, implying like the universal church, not just this denomination, which is hilarious to me. But anyways, which recognizes and confirms God's call as stewards and proclaimers of the gospel and the Church of Jesus Christ. Ordination bears witness to the Church Universal and the world at large that this candidate reveals life of holiness, possesses gifts and graces for public ministry, demonstrates a thirst for knowledge, especially for the Word of God, and displays capacity to communicate sound doctrine. Now, when I first read that, prior to this meeting where my DS said what he did, and DS is obviously shorthand for district superintendent, so you might hear me say that. I read this paragraph, and I assumed it was communicating the idea that God has gifted the church with the ability to ordain people, which is a unique thing, and that within the act of ordination, there is something supernatural conferred there, a certain charism, if you will. However, in rereading it, I recognize that the Church of the Nazarene doesn't actually teach that. Essentially, it's just the Church of the Nazarene. The way I've heard it said, which is, I guess, a summary of what this paragraph is saying, is that the Church of the Nazarene is merely giving its own stamp of recognition for something that God has already done. So in other words, when someone's ordained in the Church of the Nazarene, the church is not ordaining that person. They are recognizing that God has already ordained this person. which in other words means that the ordination ceremony is strictly a formality and there's nothing unique about it. In other words, the ordination conferred by the Church of the Nazarene, it means nothing. And you can't convince me that it does, because it simply doesn't, right? And anyways, a couple things that I want to note here, which I feel like I was lied to, actually, and I feel like this wording is actually very, very poor for a couple of reasons. One is what I already mentioned, where it keeps using the capital C for church, which again implies the universal church of all believers everywhere around the globe, not just Church of the Nazarene. The problem is, this is communicating a very false idea, which is that when the Church of the Nazarene ordains someone, in other words, this certificate, right? This ordination certificate, I know it's just a copy, but my certificate, this paragraph communicates the idea that this certificate should be universally recognized by all Christians everywhere, and that is simply false. If I go into a Baptist church with this certificate, they're not going to treat me like a pastor. They're going to recognize, oh, you're ordained in the Church of the Nazarene? Okay, well, then you're a pastor of the Church of the Nazarene, but you're not a pastor here, and you can't be a pastor here. They would actually require that in order for me to be a pastor at a Baptist church, that I rescind my Nazarene credentials and I adopt the credentials from the Baptist church, which has their own qualifications and process for doing that. It would be the same thing if I went to a Methodist church, a Wesleyan church, a Lutheran church, an Anglican church. Now that I'm converting to Catholicism, you know what? This ordination means nothing. It means absolutely nothing within the Catholic Church. And that's not a diss on the Catholic Church. If it's a diss on anything, it's the diss on the Church of the Nazarene, because here they're overtly communicating the idea that ordination, there it is, ordination bears witness to the Church universal and the world at large that this candidate reveals life of holiness, possesses gifts and graces for public ministry, blah, blah, blah. That's false. It's absolutely false. Unless you want to take the word bears witness or the phrase bears witness and interpret that in such a broad sense as to say, this ordination that we're offering you is just a testimony that we recognize that you're fit to do ministry within our own denomination. So all that to say that when I finally resigned my credentials, I think a big part of the reason why I didn't feel anything, and why I didn't feel anything when I was ordained in the first place, is because I came to recognize that in the Church of the Nazarene, my ordination carries no weight. I mean, it carries an institutional weight within the Church of the Nazarene, but outside the Church of the Nazarene, my ordination has not conferred anything to me. It is it's not a valid ordination for the Church universal. And that's tough. It's a tough thing to wrestle with, to know that I spent all these years working towards something that I believed and I was taught meant a certain thing, and then come to find out it doesn't mean that at all. It's worse than a legal fiction. It is an actual fiction. Ordination within the Church of the Nazarene, where I come from, it means nothing outside of the Church of the Nazarene. And I'm not saying that to just dunk on the Church of the Nazarene and say it's a horrible denomination. I'm not saying that. I have a lot of love for the Church of the Nazarene, but I'm just saying I'm just sharing my personal experience of what it was like to resign my credentials, because I feel like for a lot of pastors who convert, whether it's to Catholicism or something else, and they come to that point of turning in and essentially turning over something that they spent so much of their life working towards, it can be a very difficult time. And I was expecting that for myself. And I was planning on making a video like this where I sort of share that, like, oh, this was so difficult for me. It was very emotional. I really wrestled with it and all this. But the truth is I didn't. And I just find that so odd. But I still wanted to share that with you all and kind of share that part of my journey. So that's just sort of a reflection on what this was like for me, because I did resign my credentials. I'm no longer considered an ordained minister in the Church of Nazarene. Like, it's official. It's just a piece of paper at the end of the day. That's a tough pill to swallow. I guess that's the thing that I struggle with the most, is not resigning my credentials. It's recognizing that my credentials don't carry any sense of validity. And again, like, I'll emphasize this point, even within the Church of Nazarene, my ordination really doesn't mean anything. It affects my institutional status. Like, if you pulled up my records from the general office, it would show that I'm ordained, which would grant me certain privileges. But outside of that, nothing changed. And even the denomination recognizes that, right? Like, when I was told, what happens when if we decide not to ordain you, you're supposed to answer, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because it's God who ordains me and not you. Vis-a-vis, the Church of Nazarene doesn't offer ordination at all. It merely recognizes ordination, which is such a weird thing to say. But yeah, so that's going to do it for this video. Thank you for joining me on it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and if any of you have experienced something like this, or any of your reflections. But yeah, if you liked it, leave a like, comment down below, subscribe for more updates on my journey, because it's coming up. Easter's just around the corner. I realized a lot of videos I'm intending to make while I'm still in this phase of being a pre-Catholic, I guess. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you around the Tiber.